Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Adityan Rajaraman, but I go by Ditu uh, or Dr. Raj, I suppose, to many of you. I think I know a lot of you, but there are a few here names that I don't recognize. So I'm just so pleased and thankful and appreciative that you're all here. It's still quite early on a Friday morning. I invite you to get a coffee, and we're just going to hopefully have a nice little back and forth today. Um, True to form, I didn't prepare PowerPoint slides for this because, in my opinion, they always clip my wings, and I don't want my wings to be clipped. But I will be using the chat function today to share some thoughts with you and maybe some main messages if I have any. I'm a researcher, a teacher, a clinician, and a behavioral consultant. I work primarily with kids with and without intellectual, developmental, and emotional disabilities. And I teach primarily undergraduate courses in the field of behavior analysis and applied behavior analysis. And obviously, if you're here as part of the kind of in ABA Society, students of ABA Society here at UMBC. So we're probably here because we share some similar values from the jump. So I'd just like to share a little bit about my origin story and talk about kind of how my past has influenced my present. And if I kind of leave you with any main points today, I think that it would be these two that I'm going to send right in the chat. First of which is that our cumulative experiences shape exactly who we are. Things that happen in our past really can affect our present in sometimes meaningful ways. And when you pause to think about it, it can be really kind of beautiful. And second, that ordinary circumstances sometimes produce greater than ordinary outcomes. Hopefully, you'll see what I mean by that as I tell you a little bit about some of the things that I've experienced in my life. And all of this is in service of kind of trying to point out, how I chose this, I guess, career path, and some of the choice points that came along the way that helped me to do so. I suppose I'd like to tell you my origin story in a couple of different chapters. And I won't start all the way back like I was born, it was a Tuesday. I think that we will start maybe in my early high school years. Chapter 1. When I was in high school, I was a really big theater kid. And I really wanted to kind of be a performer, a star, as it were. I wanted to be on Broadway or in film. But most importantly, I wanted to be a storyteller. But I should mention that even back then, which wasn't too long ago, in the early aughts, there wasn't too much representation out there for me. That is, there wasn't too many roles out there for people that look like me, and there wasn't a very realistic kind of career there. So I didn't have that much support or encouragement in terms of pursuing theater as a long-term thing. But that was okay. I still thought that I was pretty good at it, and I did theater, in high school, and I also did something called forensics. If anybody here knows what I'm talking about when I say forensics, that isn't necessarily related to solving crimes and murders, drop a thumbs up in the chat or something like that. It might just be a Michigan thing. I grew up outside Detroit. We had this thing called forensics, which was sort of like competitive acting. Now, I could really spend 4 hours talking to you about forensics because it's one of my favorite things that I've ever done in life. But suffice to say that doing forensics, which was this competitive acting competition across high schools across the state of Michigan, really allowed me to be exposed to hundreds of different pieces of literature, from prose to poetry to storytelling to plays, screenplays, musicals, etc. And every Saturday we would have competitions in these high schools where I'd get to see 30 plus high school kids pour their hearts out with pieces that they handpicked. So some of them would pick pieces from plays, and they would curate or condense down that entire play down to an 8 to 10 minute piece, and they would come and just perform the life out of it in front of a small audience across the day. And then by the end of the day, we'd have these elimination brackets. We'd get down to finals, and it would be a high octane event. I wasn't good at sports, but this was my competition. And throughout my 4 years of doing this, like I said, I saw hundreds of different pieces, but I always found myself gravitating toward those folks that would interpret pieces that depicted individuals with special needs. I'll never forget a state champion from my freshman year was a kid named Connor who did a piece. He interpreted a short story called "Stuck in Neutral," which was about the novel was written as an inner monologue of a teenage boy with who was pretty impacted by cerebral palsy. So the idea was that this individual with cerebral palsy was non-vocal, non-verbal, couldn't communicate, but this novel was sort of his voice and his experience. And boy, that really stuck with me. I'll never forget his performance. I still remember some lines from it. I also remember how he depicted cerebral palsy in some of these scenes. And I guess looking back on it now, when I think about these, privileged high school kids depicting individuals with special needs, some of it may have been a little bit more caricature than character. But the notion of giving a voice to the voiceless was something that stuck with me, and I found it very profound. I also just kind of walked away from those experiences thinking, man, I really want to meet individuals with special needs, and I want to interact with them, and I want to learn with them. And I got that opportunity as an art camp counselor over the summer, where I initially was just kind of friendly to three kids that autistic kids that were kind of at the edges of the lunch table. And within a week, I was kind of assigned their special counselor. And there's something that I learned right there, that sometimes being friendly is enough. And the fact that I was kind of just kind to these folks meant that they liked me back, and people noticed that, and they said, hey, you should work with these three kids. And that was lovely. I should mention also that, as I said, I wanted to be a star. And one of the things that I thought that I was particularly good at was voice acting. I did a really great Mickey Mouse. And I also, I was really, really darn good at doing the Cat in the Hat from Dr. Seuss. Not to mention that I have a pretty good Elmo impression. So we got along great. And I finally had an audience for me to be who I was. And I finally felt comfortable around a certain group of people. I freaking loved working with these young men and women with autism. And that sort of drove, it was something that there was a kind of a fire burning inside. And with that fire, I guess I went off to college. Now, I guess maybe we can call this chapter 2. Letting passion guide profession. So if I've told you thus far that I was really psyched about working with individuals with disabilities and learning from them and interacting with them and getting to show off my Elmo, that was all good and well. But as I mentioned, I wasn't going to college to pursue theater, to pursue that passion. And the kind of default fallback for South Asian Americans that grow up in America is to go down the pre-med track. So that was sort of my plan, entering college on the pre-med track, and I fell off of that track in no time. It took about a semester and a half before I was like, this is not for me. All I have to show for it is this abysmal GPA and the disdain for large lecture classes. Okay, what do I do next? There was this small fire burning inside that I mentioned, and in my second semester of freshman year, I took a freshman psych seminar course with a woman named Dr. Sarah Essel. And it's at this point where I'd like to kind of share a small little nugget before I say anything more about the importance of finding good mentors, and maybe more to the point, of finding people in your life that respect you enough to tell you what you're good at and to tell you what you need to work on if you want to achieve your goals. So this freshman seminar course with Dr. Sarah Essel was great because we spent a couple weeks talking about autism. And by the end of those couple of weeks, I said, I worked with these 3 autistic kids in summer camp, and I had so much fun doing that. And that was when she said, hey, have you ever heard of applied behavior analysis? And these 3 words obviously guided the rest of my life from that point. But she said that she asked if I'd heard of ABA, which was this type of therapy that people do with children with autism. She was, by the way, a rat researcher. She'd worked under this a very esteemed professor at my college named Dr. Leonard Green. And she had a rat lab, but then she was also a newly minted board certified behavior analyst in a town, in a state where there were virtually none. So she mentioned what ABA was. I said, hey, that sounds cool. And then after class, I hung around and I said, do you have any research opportunities? Because, I have these folks on my back, and I told them I'm not pre-med anymore, but I really need something science-y to show for it. And she said, nope, no research opportunities, but I am working with this new client and I could use some in-home ABA therapists. Is that something that you might be interested in? I scratched my chin a bit because I said this, I don't know if this is sciencey enough, but it's an opportunity to hang out with another 4-year-old boy with autism whose parents are professors in the architecture school. Yeah, you bet. Sign me up. So I started working in home as an undergrad, and that was kind of my job throughout school. I worked for 4 to 6 hours a week with this kiddo. It was also amazing, and it was a little bit more, you could say, systematic than what I was doing as an art camp counselor, where my job was just to kind of keep these kids happy and maybe make them laugh. Now we had some teaching targets. It was a 4-year-old boy. We were learning some simple, like, school readiness skills. I'd pick him up from school. I wasn't very good at my job, but we got along like gangbusters, and sometimes we'd watch Mary Poppins together. So that was fun. And I was like, I think I like ABA. I don't know what it is. I give this child tokens when he does what I ask him to do, but ABA sounds like it might be for me. And then life went on. I forgot to mention, some of you may know, I was not a great student in undergrad, but I thought I was really good at a cappella. I was in a competitive group. Once again, I needed to compete. It's this weird toxic masculinity, but in the weirdest form, I suppose. So that kind of took up most of my time as an undergraduate. And then my other passion, I suppose, was working with this young boy. We'll call him Eric. And by the time I was done, I was at another choice point. Where do I go from here? I didn't take the MCAT, not going to med school. I don't think I could become a professional a cappella artist. That's not a thing. So I did the third option, and I went back to Dr. Sarah Essel and I said, hey, what can I do with ABA? Are there career opportunities? And she had been a really good mentor for me up until that point. She'd helped me get better at working with children. She'd helped me communicate with parents better. And she said, of course, you could go to graduate school and pursue a master's in ABA. And I was like, okay, sure, let's do that. Where can I go? And she said, oh, there's some great programs. There's one in Southern Illinois. There's one in North Texas. There's one in Western Kansas. There's one out in Boston. I said, Boston sounds great. Let's do that one. And so she shipped me off to, or she recommended this school called the New England Center for Children, which was kind of my next chapter in life. I applied for the job. I was fortunate to get it. And I was hired on as a direct care staff and a day teacher at this school up in right outside Boston, Massachusetts, called the New England Center for Children. Let's call this chapter 3. I got to NEC, and I have to be abundantly clear that what I'm about to share, everything that I share, is expressly my opinion and expressly based off of my own experiences. I do not mean to speak on behalf of anybody else who has or is working at NEC. And I don't mean that to sound as ominous as it sounds. I literally had some of the best years of my life while working there. But I showed up, and the vibe was very different from picking up little Eric after school, going home, watching little Mary Poppins, eating some cereal. I was assigned on a team of young adults aged 13 to 19 who engaged in incredibly dangerous problem behavior, largely directed toward other people. These were kids that had some language, but not a ton of language. They were all mostly diagnosed with autism or pervasive developmental disorder, and boy, they could hurt you. And so this was an entirely different atmosphere. It wasn't like we showed up and we smiled and we giggled. We showed up and we suited up. I wore denim jackets, I'd wear arm pads, and I'd wear helmets before starting my shift at work. And this, the New England Center for Children is sort of a world-renowned research institute for the treatment of autism spectrum disorder. So everything that we did had kind of a tinge of research behind it. It had a tinge of what we're doing here is a little bit more scientifically clinical than it is just perhaps just dishing out tokens for good behavior. And there was this vibe there that the stakes were obviously a bit higher. And one of the things that I took away from that experience was that if there are any of you that are interested in entering the field of applied behavior analysis, at this point in time, you have multiple different paths where you could take. You can go down this route where you maybe work primarily in the homes. You can work in a hospital setting or somewhere in between. You can work centers at schools. I think that one of my main positive takeaways from my experience at NEC was the camaraderie that I had working on a team serving children with really, really severe problem behavior. While I was on this team, we had each other's back up for 24 hours of the day. And I'll say more about that in a second. But we also developed really, really strong friendships because there was a bunch of people who came from a bunch of different backgrounds in life, transplanted themselves to Boston, all with a singular goal of just trying to help children who have significant problems. Boy, that was really cool. And that was a really great kind of entrance. And I was like, damn, I'm in the right career, because this is, whereas I might have gone down that med path a few years ago in service of helping those who are sick and needy, I've now found another path where I'm doing what I love every day, hanging out with people and children who also need help. Some of whom need help with basic skills like toileting and wiping. Others of whom need help regulating their emotions when things are when the going gets tough, and others of whom just engage in problem behavior 23 out of 24 hours of the day, and they sleep for 1 hour. So there was a lot to learn. There was a lot to experience. And I felt very positive about my initial experiences with this. I want to pause for a second and mention that I am a researcher now, but my initial relationship with researchers in the field of behavior analysis was not a very positive one. In fact, I might say that I disdained researchers when I first met them. And in order to illustrate that, I'd like to talk a little bit about my very first case student, the client for whom I was responsible for his life. Basically, I needed to make sure that his clothes were folded. I needed to make sure that his parents knew when they were picking him up. I needed to make sure that his academics were all in order. And we'll call him Dennis. And Dennis was one of the most kind of challenging kids on our team. We worked in these residential teams where there was 8 to 10 children. They all lived in the same house together. And by the way, when I say residential, I say that these kids lived in these houses largely because their behavior was too dangerous for them to live at home. In lieu of a PowerPoint, I'll share this. I guess it's a picture of my Ursula Drive family. These are some of the dudes that I had the pleasure of hanging out with for 3 to 5 years while I was there. Wow, props. That's cool. Anyway, I worked with Dennis, and he was a tricky guy, and it was because his behavior wasn't linear. It wasn't like, I'm not getting attention, I'm going to hit someone. Oh, I didn't get my toy, I'm going to hit someone. His behavior, his challenging behavior, which did consist of hurting people, hurting himself, destroying his own bedroom, it occurred seemingly out of nowhere, seemingly at random. And perhaps his most concerning topography of problem behavior was what we used to call non-compliance and flopping. And we would hang out with Dennis until 2 to 3 a.m. because he would refuse to go from the basement up to his bedroom, and we weren't allowed to just leave a child in the basement. We would sometimes stay at the school until 11 p.m. when our shift was done at 4 because Daniel refused to get off of to get up and walk to a van, and we never knew why. But we just kind of tried to move him anyway. Dennis was a guy who wore a belt that he would wear across his entire day that had handlebars on it so that we could carry him to and fro when he would refuse to move. And there was something about that I will say it felt icky, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that there was an element of me that wanted to teach Dennis lessons when he would refuse our expectations. So if I can give a little bit of context here, there's this culture where we worked with some really dangerous, challenging kids, and these kids sometimes were out to hurt us. These kids would sometimes target us, and we were trained, we were certified to engage in calm physical procedures, restraint and guidance procedures that were explicitly designed to keep kids safe, but were also sometimes used to follow through when kids were non-cooperative and things of that sort. And all of that's good and well, and it's all done in the name of safety, and it's always done as an emergency procedure for the most part. But there was this kind of subculture that existed amongst our ranks, amongst the daycare staff, where we sort of had a level of pride in being able to do these procedures properly. And we would take pride in the fact that the children didn't get out of our expectation when we would escort them from one room to the next. And part of what I loved about this job was being good at physically managing children. And that was something that I'll come back to a bit later on. But these were some of my early experiences, I suppose. Okay, I mentioned that I have a certain disdain for researchers, and it probably sounds pretty crappy if I'm calling myself one, but my first experience with a researcher was this external consultant that came in, and he shall remain nameless, but he was a pretty well-revered person in the field of applied behavior analysis. And I can't even describe to you how this stuff worked. When we had an external consultant come in to consult on some of our most challenging cases, the seas parted, we rolled out a red carpet, and we were like, yes, please come in and please help us fix these problems. And the first man that came in and heard about Dennis, who, by the way, was a Korean-American teenage boy, he came in and he kind of said some racist stuff, and that was disconcerting. We told him for a half an hour, we described the nature of Dennis's problem behavior, and we described that right now our biggest issue is that we're struggling to teach Dennis or to have Dennis transition from one place to the next. And this researcher stroked his chin and said, yeah, it's probably because he's Asian. And I know that he didn't mean anything bad by it. Well, I don't know what he meant by it, in fact, to this day. But when I think of like how I define racism, I guess it's attributing certain behaviors to one's race. And that was quite literally what this person who was trained to be a behavior analyst did. And so not only did he say that, and that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but he also wasn't helpful. Dennis's problems continued until we eventually discharged him from our school. Our next experience with a researcher was with another kiddo that I worked with who was also challenging. We'll call him Andrew. And we brought in one of the most world-renowned researchers in the field of severe disabilities of treating problem behavior, rolled out the red carpet. We brought him in for an hour consult to talk about Andrew. And he asked us to describe our assessments for about 45 minutes of that hour. He criticized the way that we ran these assessments, and then he just told us to run more assessments. So I have to be honest, I had no freaking clue what research was at the time. All that I had associated with were these men that were coming in, telling us to do things differently, being kind of racist, and then moving on and not really helping us solve the problems that we needed. So I was like, what are we doing here? Like, first of all, this stuff isn't helpful. Second of all, in what world does this stranger coming into my house know my kids better than I do, right? We have real problems on our hand. We don't know how to fix them. And I didn't understand the link between my experiences and that dude's experiences over there. Okay, I'm being a downer. A third researcher comes in. We roll out the red carpet, the seas part, we bring him in, and I'm talking about this is a third client. This was in my final year working at the New England Center. And this was another really challenging guy. This person had sent 7 people to the hospital in the span of 2 weeks because he was really dangerous, and he would he would pull their hair down to his knee, and it was like a TKO kind of move. And it also was occurring, like I said, 23 hours of the day. We brought in this other researcher, and at this point, I'm kind of like worked up. I was invited to come to this thing, but they said, you need to sit there and you need to make sure that only like the leaders are talking. But I had like kind of an axe to grind. And this researcher came in, and rather than telling us what to do, he just asked us about our experiences. And there was this moment where a BCBA, kind of a supervisor, was talking, and he said, excuse me, if you don't mind, I would just love to hear from these folks that are kind of working with Sean on a day-to-day basis. And I was like, maybe researchers aren't that bad. And maybe it was as simple as the fact that he wanted to listen to what I had to say, and that he validated kind of our thoughts and our experiences about these challenges and these children that we were working with. But furthermore, this person left, and he did not provide a single recommendation until we kind of asked for one. And he did not ask us to run more assessments without providing us some very clear kind of treatment recommendations. And furthermore, this man said, I actually want to follow up on this. So I'm going to come back next week, and I'm going to check in. We're going to keep this relationship going. And at that point, I kind of, everything that I had thought I hated about researchers, about this like ivory tower where you just come in and you tell me what to do and you're the expert, but you're not an expert on my child. It started to change a bit. And that man, his name was Dr. Greg Hanley. And he ended up, well, I'll say some stuff about him in a second, but what I really appreciated from what I learned from Dr. Hanley in that meeting was, I guess you could say I learned three things. In that meeting itself, Dr. Greg Hanley taught us that things happen for more than one reason. And I suppose I didn't give the proper context for this point, but with all the children that I worked with thus far, we tended to look at their challenging behavior as though it only occurred to produce one outcome, one reinforcing outcome. We're all here in an ABA class, or ABA people, some sense. So I hope that language lands with you. But I used to believe that if a child engaged in any type of problem behavior, that it was always kind of reinforced by or maintained by or caused by one singular outcome. And Dr. Hanley taught us in that meeting, and he said it in plain terms, that it's likely that this child is engaging in problem behavior for multiple reasons. Maybe under these conditions, he's engaging in these behaviors because of this. Maybe under other conditions, he's engaging in behaviors because of something else. And that was a really neat point, and it truly opened my eyes to how I've been viewing the problem behavior that I was tasked with treating, with addressing in my own practice. Second, Dr. Hanley taught me that when it comes to helping individuals with disabilities, that everyone's voice matters, and that we don't need to only listen to experts, but in fact, some of the best information, some of the truest stories come from those who interact with these children on a day-to-day basis. And that was a really different vibe from what I had experienced with researchers, I guess, in the past. And then the third thing that he taught me, and this one really set my trajectory after my life at NEC, was that we shouldn't be satisfied with the work that we do until those that we serve say, thank you, problem solved. And this was something that I really kind of struggled with, because I may not have mentioned this, but at a school like the New England Center for Children, it's a phenomenal school with an incredible set of resources, and we provide so much love and care to these children, and we give them a life that is certainly better than what they may have been experiencing otherwise. But there's another part of that story where these children would come in at age 6, and they would stay at the New England Center for Children until age 22. And they would often leave at age 22, engaging in the same types of problem behavior that they were engaging in when they were 6 and when they entered the New England Center for Children. And so when I reflect on all the individuals that I've worked with, I think, have I really helped them? Did what we did our treatment, did our behavior analytic, research-informed treatments really help these children, or were we simply sort of managing their problem behavior? And again, it was revelatory. It kind of blew my mind, because I kind of thought that when it comes to kids that are so dangerous that they live in a residential facility, maybe what's best for them is just to continue living in some such facility while trying to manage their behavioral episodes and trying to kind of improve their quality of life just to the extent where they're not hurting themselves and hurting others. But Dr. Hanley kind of taught me that there's perhaps more to that. So this brings me to sort of chapter 4, which I haven't titled, but we'll just say learning more about that stuff. How does that sound? I was super fortunate. Well, ordinary circumstances sometimes lead to greater than ordinary outcomes. I was a bit of a squeaky wheel in that meeting, kind of because I was ticked off at researchers. And I was like, well, listen, I need to tell you my thoughts on this. And this man, Dr. Hanley, validated those thoughts. And he also kind of complimented those thoughts. And that made me feel good. And then a year later, we somehow got reconnected. And he was generous enough to invite me to be a volunteer in his research laboratory, which I did. I had at that point read all of his papers, and I had watched all of his videos on YouTube, because I was sort of like, whoa, there's a researcher who's speaking to practitioners, and that sounds really awesome. And I ultimately ended up applying to and being accepted to be a doctoral student in his lab. And I studied under Dr. Greg Hanley. And that is where I learned really what I meant when I said I didn't like researchers before. And I also learned that there is an absolute value to being a researcher in the field of behavior analysis, especially when that research is clinically oriented, and especially when that research is trying to help families with the problems that they have right in front of them. So for 3 years, I lived in rural Massachusetts, not Boston, in a town called West Springfield. And I worked in a outpatient clinic that was serving kids that were admittedly much younger and oftentimes smaller than the kids that I had been trying to help up at the New England Center for Children, but whose problems were no less severe and no less distressing to the families that we served. And I learned a bit of a different way to address and treat problem behavior. And some of these kind of 3 points that I mentioned before really played a key role in how I learned to not only assess and treat problem behavior, but do so in a research capacity. At this point, you might be thinking, what does it even mean? What's the difference between research and doing clinical work? To some degree, I didn't know the answer at that point either. And what I learned is that sometimes research just means you put a camera on when you do your therapy sessions and you record it so that somebody else can record the behavior as well. Research might also mean that you're a little bit more careful and systematic about the changes you make when you're trying to help someone. That rather than just say, okay, well, tomorrow we're going to remove the backpack, we're going to have a totally new token board, and we're going to do 10 different things, that you maybe try to make one or two changes at a time, and you carefully observe the effect of those changes on children's, problem behavior and things of that sort. So I was doing research, but it was, outcome oriented. And we worked with, probably saw about 20 to 30 kids in my time there that came through, parents at their wits' end, worried that they're going to have to send their children out of their home, maybe on to a residential school or something of that sort. And we learned how to do quick, safe, and practical assessments to understand a little bit about those reinforcers that might be contributing to their problem behavior. And we also learned kind of a more linear way to teach them not just one behavior, but a complex repertoire of skills that replace sort of their problem behavior. And if you've ever taken a class with me, you know that you might know that I'm obsessed with this concept of like functional control. And that is another part of like doing a research-oriented behavior analysis or scientific behavior analysis, is the idea that you can quite literally see the changes in behavior when you make a particular change in an independent variable. And that was something that from my experience at NEC with all these, with Dennis, Sean, and Andrew, with all these clients that we really did throw a kitchen sink at them and we tried to help them, we never really got to carefully observe how the changes we made impacted their behavior. But being able to do this in a research capacity in an outpatient clinic where there's a little bit less kind of external noise really taught me the power of behavior analysis, the power of differential reinforcement, of taking all the things that might be reinforcing problem behavior and providing them all for other behavior, for alternative behavior. Maybe teach a child to communicate along the way, maybe teach them to cooperate along the way. That was a really formative experience for me, and that really instantiated my desire to continue to do research in service of helping children with autism and intellectual and emotional disabilities. I'll leave you with this thought that I was still feeling a little icky. Well, now that I had seen a safer way and a more kind of gentler, trauma-informed way to approach problem behavior in the children that I had been working with in this clinic, and now at that point also via telehealth consultation, I reflected on my time with Dennis, the kid who wore a lift belt 24 hours a day because we might need to carry him from A to B. I thought about my time with Dennis and how he never even met me without my denim jacket and my arm pads on. He's never seen me in street clothes. And I thought about that context as of course those measures were put in for safety, but I think about the signals that I sent this child who I was trying to develop trust with and who I was trying to teach, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the fact that I always signaled that at any point in time, I might go hands-on, I might restrain you, I might physically guide you from one location to the next. And that really set the course, I suppose, for sort of my research agenda. Which has largely been kind of based on trying to develop treatments for problem behavior that truly obviate the need or render unnecessary the need for any kind of physical management procedures. So I know it's kind of like a disjointed story here, but I suppose it contributes to my point that our cumulative experiences shape exactly who we are. It wasn't like I was restraining children or physically managing children in the clinic that I was in. We did that quite rarely, but I was just seeing that with a 6, 7, or 8-year-old, we were able to get these beautiful, exceptional behavioral outcomes and have their parents say, "Thank you, problem solved." But I never achieved that with a single child that I restrained while I was working at the New England Center for Children. So my current research agenda, you might say, or the stuff that I've been hoping to work on has been trying to bring assessments and treatments that really avoid the use of physical management, that are really predicated on trust, and that really are built sort of from a place of child happiness as opposed to child endangerment. That's really been something that I've been interested in working on as a researcher at UMBC. Of course, COVID has put a damper on our ability to do human subjects research, but that didn't stop us from asking questions of a similar sort. So I won't even call it Chapter 5 because I'm going to be really, really brief here. I've known most of you while I've been here at UMBC. I am interested I still do work with children with dangerous problem behavior, now more so in a telehealth capacity than in real life. But the name of the game is all about, can we produce those meaningful, thank you, problem solved outcomes without really any stress and without any kind of mistrust and without any physical management along the way. And so we've been investigating some treatment procedures that really that are primarily influenced by participant choice. They choose to come in when they want. They choose to leave when they want. They choose which tough stuff they want to work on today. They choose which fun things they want to play with today. And we're trying to kind of evaluate how different dimensions of choice and different levels of providing choice might lead to, I suppose, strong treatment outcomes. And we're also trying to measure some of these outcomes that aren't directly related to the rate of problem behavior exhibited by a child, but maybe the rate of their approach response toward an adult, their rate of choosing to participate in their own treatment. I'll leave you with this notion, not with this notion, I'll leave you with the fact that I'm currently been working with 4 brilliant undergrad research assistants. They are Desiree Walker, Olivia Schweigerath, Zoha Awan, and Bethlehem Getahun, some of whom are here today. Hi, people. Desiree, Olivia, and Zoha all have posters that they're going to be presenting at URCAD this coming week. And it's some of the work that we've been fortunate to do during the pandemic in the absence of working directly with children. We've been asking a bunch of some questions where we've just been combing through the literature, and some questions where we sent out a survey. Desiree's been working on a literature review, examining the role that ABA has played in the treatment of characteristics of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in individuals with ADHD. Zoha has been working on a literature review that she worked on with a master's student in the ABA program here at UMBC, focusing on the extent to which treatments for feeding disorders are implemented with integrity and the extent to which we understand if those treatments are done correctly or not. And then finally, Olivia is presenting a poster on a survey related to all this stuff that I've been talking about, the use, the feasibility, and the acceptability of physical management procedures as they're used in ABA practice. So if any of what I talked about today piqued your interest, I encourage you to check out their posters. They're probably like, oh my goodness, Dr. Raj, why are you doing this? But check out their posters, leave a comment, smash that like and subscribe button. I think that's all I want to say. To sum it all up, little tiny interactions here or there, feeling burned by some researcher that came into my world and he has no idea that he had that effect on me. Being told by my support circle that I would never be a star. And also being told by some young kids with autism that my Elmo voice is pretty good. All clearly played a role in who I am today and in what I do. And I'm, despite the fact that I might have sounded maybe a little crabby about some of my experiences, I absolutely am incredibly grateful and appreciative for each and every one. And I look forward to being able to use, I suppose, those experiences to continue to help people until they say, thank you, problem solved. Thanks, everyone.
That was wonderful. I might give you a standing ovation, but I'm pretty
Oh my
comfy right
goodness.
now.
That would be
But
a WebEx first for me. Thank you.
that was awesome, everyone. Oh, yes, Claire says take his classes. He's an awesome professor. Take 393 Applied Behavior Analysis and 411, which I'm not sure. I think that's a writing intensive, right?
It
Um,
is.
Awesome. If anybody has any questions for Dr. Raj, because we've learned about his origin story, and how he got to where he is today, and as we are all undergrads trying to formulate our own path, I'm sure he can answer some questions that any of you have.
I think, Megan, I saw that you sent a list of some questions. I don't know if those were from crowdsourced or you were just being very polite. Either way, it was perceived as polite.
Yes, I did. So we can start with some of those to get the ball kind of rolling. I feel like you answered a lot of uh, these questions. My cat is even meowing for you because
Wow. Honored.
she's like, wow. Um, but I guess, some of the questions that we have as students always has to do with like how can we get the most experience as an undergraduate student if we're trying to pursue a graduate degree or career in ABA. So I guess the question that we have would be, what kind of experience do you recommend for undergraduate students to look for when pursuing a career in ABA?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, and I don't presume to have any expertise, but I think if I can give the most concise answer possible, it would be more than one. I strongly recommend trying to practice ABA in more than one setting, and that might even mean within your organization that you work on one team for a year or 6 months, and then you try out another team because you'll be amazed at how many different ways there are to skin a cat, how many different ways there are to apply behavior analysis to help children or to help your colleagues or to help their families. And so for me, I was on this team, Ursula Drive, for 3 years without leaving. And I thought for some time that I told you that we pumped our chest out and we felt really good about it. I thought I was going to be an Ursula lifer, which is kind of a little thing that we have in our culture. Some people are there for life. And I was like, this has to be the bee's knees. These are the best kids. I freaking love them. I never want to leave. And then I took one step outside and I worked on another team and I was like, oh, this is also awesome and very different, exceptionally different. So I just can't recommend enough that you, especially into this day and age where you have home-based, center-based, school-based, hospital-based, university clinic-based, it is so essential to be able to at least have two experiences so that you can create a discrimination. So you can say, I think I like this about this experience, and I don't think I liked this about this experience. Because ultimately, you want to be fine. You want to let your passion guide your profession, I suppose.
It's a wonderful answer. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll read some of the questions in the chat. Phyllis asks, what made you choose your path?
Yeah, sure. I suppose I said most of the things, but uh, if I'm being just completely blunt with you, every once in a while, when someone believes in you and they give you a little nod of support and they say, "Hey, I think that you could do this," it can go a long way. And so I mean it when I say, like, I mean, I'll sound like such a brat. Like, I was bummed that nobody wanted me to be on Broadway. What the heck, guys? I could have been a star, but I wasn't. But there were some people that said, you're kind of good with kids, and that level of positive reinforcement kind of kind of elevated me. And then truly, when you help a child with something and you see them overcome an obstacle, you see them struggling with some type of situation, and then you help them overcome it, it will provide a level of reinforcement that is immeasurable to me Well, measured by the fact that I'm still here. Uh, so helping others, and then also, every once in a while being told that what you're doing is okay, can really guide your path, I think.
Wonderful.
Let me put it one more way. I really appreciate the notion of putting your behavior out there and letting the universe tell you what to do next. If you put your behavior out there and people say you're great at this, and you're like, that feels pretty good, maybe you should keep doing it. But if they're like, man, you'd have to really change who you are in order to fit in here, um, that's something too. Can I share a brief anecdote? It's a bit of a digression. I'd like to talk a little bit about my younger sister, who unfortunately was laid off early in the pandemic. And so she went through some tough times, and in her field which was public relations, she applied to literally greater than 100 jobs and did not receive a single invitation to interview, because that's kind of what the field was. And they kept giving her this feedback that was just a jab here or there, but the cumulative effect of that was that it completely kind of broke her. And then so she got a temp job, but they didn't extend her contract. So she was back at the drawing board, and she was like, am I going to have to apply for 100 more jobs? And we kind of had a little life chat, and I said, they're asking you to be somebody who you're not. They're asking you to be this cutthroat person, to be on your A game and talk a particular way. And I don't want you to have to go through the experience of applying to 100 different jobs. And I told her, I know of this field where you are almost guaranteed to get work if you could do it within 4 or 5 job applications. And my sister is now a registered behavior technician in the state of Michigan. And she doesn't know if this is going to be her lifelong passion, but this young woman who's kind of been through the ringer during the pandemic is now I'm so impressed by her emotional and mental growth. She's probably gonna be super mad when I tell her that I shared this with you. But she also has been able to reflect on, and she's at least told me, I'll tell you what, when I go in and I work with some of these young children with autism, and I not only do I just experience the difficulties that they struggle, but I'm able to help, it puts so much perspective on my own kind of life and on my own problems, which isn't to invalidate my own problems, but I see it through a different lens now. And I feel like I can kind of be more of myself in this career. And so I hope that's relevant to the question, but try to find a place that helps you be who you are.
That's so inspirational. We love that. Thank you for answering that great question from Phyllis. We also have something that's kind of related to that question, a great question from Saeed. I hope I pronounced your name right. But he asks, what personality traits are most needed to work in the ABA field?
Oh man, I hope my answer isn't controversial. I'm sure that different people will disagree. I think that you need to like working with children. And I think that's all I want to say. Everything else can be shaped. Obviously, having good professional skills, liking working with other people. You're not going to avoid people. So those things are very, very important. Time management, professionalism. But to me, those that I've seen people come into this field and come out of it, and there are people that have just like, they're not put together at all, but they freaking love kids, and they can grow and become really, really successful, impactful people in this field. And it's totally okay if that's not your thing. You can give it a shot, and you might realize, oof, that's just not how I want to be spending my time. I don't think that that's selfish. I don't think anything of that like that. But to me, number one is that you have to just like spending time with children and other people. And Claire's bringing up a really good point. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you're like, I love children. I'm Ditu. Look at me. I'm always gonna be like this. That's not what I mean. I just mean that you have to like children. In fact, I learned that the hard way with one of these guys up here. He did not care too much for my big personality. Okay, that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, a good starting point, definitely. So I think that brings us to our next question. What advice would you give your past undergraduate self that's still exploring this field?
What advice? I think I would have told that's still exploring this field. Not like what would I've done differently?
Well, you could answer both if you like.
Damn. I want one answer is I would say pick up a camera. I wish that I had done something involved in filmmaking, and maybe that could have helped on my journey with ABA. I don't know that it did. That's what's coming to strength right now. But advice for my younger self in the field of ABA. I think I'm coming up empty. Well, I guess it's like I had these chips on my shoulder. You've heard me say it today. Like I was so angsty so much of the time because I was like, I don't like the way other people are doing things. And part of me is, like I said, those experiences led to where I'm at today. But maybe I didn't need to be so angsty. Maybe I could have been a little bit more humble, less prideful. And I think that that might have guided me. Great example is as it relates to that Dennis story. I was so I was so angsty that this person thought they knew about Dennis better than me. I was like, I'm Dennis's favorite person in the world. You don't get to tell me how to interact with him. And that probably didn't serve me too well at that time and didn't serve me too well in my immediate professional development. So uh, no, absolute humility would have been welcome, I think, to a younger me. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I say one more thing about undergrad stuff? Absolutely should have had more contact with professors, and with other mentors and other faculty. I was scared shitless to reach out to faculty because I thought they were going to tell me that I was not good enough, or they were going to be like, well, why weren't you in class last week? And I wouldn't have had a good excuse. So I wouldn't reach out to ask for help, to ask for guidance, to ask for mentorship. And that left me with, I only got applied to that one job out of college. I didn't have options for myself. I didn't set myself up to be more successful. And so definitely, if I can provide advice to anyone here, it's reach out. It never hurts to reach out. If you get burned, if you get ghosted, what's it called? Iced? I don't know. You don't get a response. Reach out again. Give it a week. Reach out again. Don't let that extinction bring you down.
God, I think we all just needed to hear that. I remember it took me a lot. It took a lot out of me to be able to come up to a person and be like, "Hi, can I have some advice or something?" And here we are, and I have the best mentors in the world. So take that advice, everybody. Um, we'll go on to Shanna's question. I hope I pronounced your name right. Could you elaborate on your research with building trust with your clients?
Sure. Wow. Thanks for asking that, Shanna. Um, yeah. So, uh, by and large, when when I worked with children in the past, you're kind of like assigned to this team, or you're assigned a caseload, and then you kind of show up, and it's day one. We start to teach. This was my experience, by the way, not everyone's experience. Day one, and we put expectations in place, and we're like, well, this is what happens. You're at a school now where day one we go to class, so we're going to take you to class, and that's kind of the expectation. And sometimes we would play that out. Children would engage in dangerous problem behavior, and then we'd temper our expectations and we'd go one step at a time. Let's just maybe walk to the classroom. The next day we'll walk and we'll take one foot step in. So that idea sort of has been flipped on its head. And some of the work we do now is just that we would never, it all starts with when a client comes in for services, whether it's you're going to their school or they're coming to your clinic or you're meeting them in the home. We never put in a teaching trial. We never put in an expectation unless we observe them to be happy, relaxed in their environment, and engaged with not only their stuff but potentially you. So whereas I used to kind of go in and on day one I'd be like, all right, let's get our baseline data. Let me see what happens when I poke this bear. Sometimes now I'm willing to spend more than one day just trying to achieve that level of, I suppose you could say, trust. That is manifested in the way in which people interact with us and the way in which they interact with their things. There's a lot of kids that have, I mean, trust is a weird word, tough word to define behaviorally, but a lot of these folks, these young children and these adolescents who go through, who just have, they're in and out of different therapy contexts. Maybe they go to a specialized school, but then they come home and they get home-based, ABA therapy. There's just a lot of um, expectations placed on them, first of all, but I have felt that there's also a lot of mistrust because Sometimes adults are like sort of, they find success in tricking their kids. That we find success in being like, you know what, maybe we can kind of, you know, we can eat this candy once we go take our meds, or once we go to the dentist's office. And we sort of like, I used to do this thing of like kind of gaming kids. So it's just about not doing that anymore, and not trying to teach kids until they indicate to us that they are ready to be taught, that they are willing to be taught. And when it comes to the research perspective on that, we are trying to measure if that is leads to better treatment outcomes, and also leads to kind of stronger rapport, and things of that sort. I'm sure that that's kind of a superficial answer. I could go deeper, but I'll leave it at that.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming and for asking questions. And of course, thank you, Dr. Raj, for answering them. We've learned so much today from your experience and your line of work as well. We just came up with this very quickly, but would it be okay with everybody, Dr. Raj, especially you, if we take like a screenshot for our social media? Because we'd love to share this with everybody.
Yeah, I'm down.
Oh, you're a star, so you know how it is to have your picture
Me
taken
in front of a
with me.
camera? Just kidding.
If you're not comfortable with being on camera, anybody who has their camera on, please feel free to turn it off. That's totally fine. Just a disclaimer, but also follow us on UMBC SABAS. You'll see us there. I don't know how to take a screenshot, actually.
I'm just gonna be smiling for the next 2 minutes.
Sorry, and what did you say?
I can do it.
Okay, cool.
Okay, ready?
Okay, smile, everyone.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Wow.
Wow, thank you so much.
It made the click and everything. That was great.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. If anybody wants to chat about any of this stuff, or any other things ABA related or life related, just drop my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out. I'm very honored to be here. Ooh, my leg fell asleep.
Thank you so much. That was great. And thanks everyone for